Sure, he may have been trying to do something, but he knew what he needed to do to gain your attention. This is the same kiddo who was working one-on-one with his TA out in the hallway, and his TA said, if you throw that pencil, you're going to the principal's office. What do you think happened? Oh, no. He'd been through this before. He picked up a chair, and he threw the chair, because the chair just wasn't a ticket to the principal. It was a ticket home. And so our kiddos learn. They know what's coming, and they know how to kick it up. But power and control, absolutely. We need to teach. We need to provide opportunities so that they have power and control. And it is research validated.
I think the control, too, there's always a big anxiety component.
Anxiety.
A lot of students that the control is an issue, and it's because of anxiety, but the behavior that they're exhibiting, you don't think of it as a control issue, but it is that getting back to them being anxious in the situation, and then they feel like they're losing control, so then they're getting in trouble with behaviors that are really all it's control.
Exactly.
And thank you so much for segueing into the caution. The reason we have question marks there is that I do think almost everybody, when this became a seventh option, they're like, oh, it's all about control. It's all about that. It's a child trying to control. It's aberrant behavior. Don't jump there first. Absolutely not. If it can fit into the first 6, put it in a 6. Because power and control, I mean, you all know this. It's really hard to observe that and observe that consistently and to take data on that, because what I may view as he's trying to have control, she may view as something else. And if something is not objective, I really hesitate jumping there ever. I really want, as if I can walk in and see the same thing and call that behavior, then we're doing something right. But if there's fuzziness there, then I just be very cautious about that one.
Which is why we go back to FBAs. And one of the first steps of that FBA is objectively defining our target behavior. What does that challenging behavior look like? And making sure that we define it so that if a stranger walks in the room, that person could take that piece of paper that we've defined our behavior on and know exactly what to look for. And so that's one of the most important parts of that FBA, is making sure that we objectively define our target behavior. Because like Christi said, when we use words that could be interpreted differently, like aggressive, what I think is aggressive is completely different than I'm sure what you think is aggressive. What frustration looks like to me is probably very different than what frustration looks like to each of you, and also for each of our students. They display those behaviors differently. And so that's why it's so important that we really break down what that looks like so that everybody can measure and collect data on the same behavior.
And the next slide basically sums that up and says, our kids, all people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have available to them. And sometimes their best tool is pulling down a blind. It works, it's effective. They are not doing something just to
make you upset.
Ampersand and ampersand percent you. They're not doing it for that reason.
They're not doing it in spite of you. They're not doing it, they're using what they have at that moment. And you have to take into consideration what else is going on in the environment, the anxiety levels. And so there's lots that play into what's going on at that very moment when your student might be losing it. And the buzz is back. It worked for a while.
So our first evidence-based practice, we're only going to go over this one very briefly because we've already talked about it a lot this morning, is functional communication training. That's just when you're choosing a very systematic approach to teaching a formal communication system. We're going to readdress this when we go back to PECS later. Functional communication training was just one of those 5 recommendations that we gave, and it really emerged as part of that FBA cycle when that started to come into our thinking about behavior as a way to find a more appropriate behavior to replace the inappropriate behaviors.
And we really think that because behavior, if you take a look at behavior, no matter what, behavior equals communication. And so if we use that functional behavior assessment process to identify what it is that they're trying to communicate using their behavior, Then we can go back and try to teach a appropriate replacement, or that's when we want to put that formal communication system in place for that student.
And then we just have little bubbles for each of those 5, and then we'll move on to the new ones. But these were just some of the thoughts that we've already talked about in terms of reinforcement. You all understand that relationship. One of the things that I think is really important is you all remember from your coursework and all of the training that you've done that there are 2 types of reinforcement, right? There's primary reinforcement and secondary reinforcement. And the thing to remember when you're teaching a new skill is that you are going to link those 2 things together. But that's something that teachers really hesitate about, right? How many of you yourselves or a teacher that you've worked with really don't ever want to bring in food as an option for a reinforcer, right? How many can't? Right, which, yeah, hi. Right? Your administrator says no, your school won't let you, your clinic won't let you, food is not an option, but food is very much a primary reinforcer. When is food not a primary reinforcer? This is the other problem with food as a reinforcer. When you're satiated, right? And so right after lunch, food is no longer a primary reinforcer. It's only a primary reinforcer when you're hungry. Well, you can't see hunger, right? But, so that's the age old. You guys are going to constantly be engaged in that conversation. But the thing to think about with reinforcement is even if you hate it, even if you hate the fact that this kid will only eat the red Sour Patch Kid, I know y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to eat the yellow, orange. I only want the red one. So you open 27 packages because he'll only eat the red one. And then the next day he comes in and will eat green. And you're like, what? I don't even know you anymore. That kid, is that working? Does the red gummy work? Typically, for that kid, absolutely. That is very reinforcing. So why are you going to make him go for something that's not reinforcing? So it's really about finding an effective reinforcer. Those of you who, if anybody came to the pre-conference workshop last year, we showed and demonstrated preference assessment. How many of you all do preference assessments with your kids? A little bit? A little bit? Some? Preference assessment it may feel like a step backward, but it's not a step backward. It is an absolutely critical step because you know what's reinforcing for me? I mean wine, but who doesn't have wine as a reinforcer? So that's very reinforcing. But another reinforcing thing for me is dirt under my fingernails. I love to weed my garden. I love it, love it, love it, love it. My husband will plant. Great, he'll do all the hard work. Just let me get out there and weed my garden. I love it. I love mud all over me. That is not reinforcing to several of you, I'm guessing, right? But we have no way of knowing that. If you give me the option to weed my garden or something else, I'm going to choose to weed. But I have to be given the option to know that that's a preference for me. So Nikki's going to walk us through the basic way to do a preference assessment for kids with ASD. Or anybody, except no weeding.
Now, identifying reinforcers for your students. What are some of the ways that you know what your students like? So you're doing some direct observation and identifying what some of those interests are. Anything else? Checklist. Do you all have access to checklists? Because we have some really good ones that we can share with you guys to email out. We'll get those to you. I've got some really good ones that some school districts use that teachers use at the beginning of the school year and then probably every 6 weeks thereafter because we know interests change and we like making sure that those are up to date. Because what we want to do, and by doing a preference assessment, is we want to have a toolbox of reinforcers. We want to make sure that we have lots of things that are highly, highly motivating because like Christi said, Stacy said.
Stacy. I'm sorry.
Same duo.
Same.
You get satiated. And so a reinforcer may not have that same effectiveness, but we want to make sure that we have a good toolbox to choose from. Yes? It's just something I don't do it we just do it in the classroom setting. And we make sure that we have a variety of reinforcers. Oftentimes they will include it in the additional comments section or the notes section of the IEP so that you can continually address and identify what those reinforcers are.
Set it up as a reinforcer menu.
Yep.
Yep.
It's flexible and we don't put a specific reinforcer, but a reinforcer of the student's choosing.
Yeah. I don't often change it in an FBA document.
But just making sure that you
that
have
we have
access
a menu
to
of choices and that they select because when I did early young kids with complex disabilities, they were choosing a reinforcer before every activity.
And those reinforcers change when they're that young, or even when my reinforcers change quite sometimes, not quite frequently, but you want to make sure that you do have a good variety, because one day, maybe that spinny object is going to work, but the next day, it's going to be an edible, it's going to be a drink, it's going to be something different. So you just want to make sure that you have a variety.
And I think you also want to balance.
Absolutely.
Because when we do our weekly drills, they're going to get, we're on a variable interval schedule, so they're getting the lesser through the work session, but they're learning.
What's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck? Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you need to know also as you're doing this, what are those reinforcers? And honestly, I ask the parents, and whatever reinforcer the parent uses at home is off limits in the school setting. Why? I'm not going to take that carrot away from them because they have the kiddos, the other 18 hours of the day. And so I want to make sure that whatever those highly reinforcing things are, that we keep them so that they are working in that other environment. And so then I want to find what the next best things are. So what I do is I do direct observation. I find out what are those things that are interesting. I do those checklists. So I try to get a whole bunch of things and I put them in a big bag. And then I sit down with the student. Will you be my student? I sit down at a table with my student or on the floor, wherever, and I set out 3 different things. We've got bubbles, a candy, and then some putty. And what I do is I just write down, I don't do anything formal. I write down what my items are, and then I'll do a tally mark as to which one they're going to select. And so I watch the student, and I see if their eyes are gazing towards something, or I see which ones they reach for. And then you can pick one. So she wants the candy. So then what I do is I'll let her have the candy, and I have lots of pieces of candy. So then I rearrange, and I always do a variety of 3. And I make sure that I switch the positioning. I make sure that that the student's crossing midline, because we don't always want the student to grab what's right in front of them. So there's lots of different things, and each time they take a different item or that item, I mark it as a tally on my sheet. And I try getting at least 5 or 6 different things, so you really want to have a good number of items that you're testing. And then what you're going to do is you can prioritize them. You can go through and you can find out, okay, this one is really reinforcing, because I'll put my top 3 that they picked, and I'll go through and say, all right, which one are they going to go through and pick over and over and over? But I keep going through that system of moving the placement, changing around the order, putting new things in, and making sure I kind of think of what those sensory needs are, because oftentimes some of those sensory related behaviors, sensory items, are going to also be very reinforcing. And then on top of that, when I think about what it is that I'm going to use that reinforcer for, if it's going to be teaching a new skill, sometimes I'll pull out an edible. Sometimes I'll pull out a piece of candy. I'll have chips. Do I give the student the whole chip? I break a piece off so that they don't get satiated on it. But I try a variety of things. I know what the candy is. I know what those edibles are that they really like. And then I know what those toys are. But by doing this and identifying and trying lots of different options, you can identify what it is that is really truly reinforcing. Maybe there's headphones, maybe it's music, maybe it's 5 minutes of computer time if you have a kiddo that's a tech kid. And so those are all things that you can build in when you're teaching skills to use as immediate reinforcement, and they're also things that you can build into your token economy where they have to earn certain amount of something to be able to cash in to get that reinforcer. So that's the basic, most simplest level of a preference assessment. But what you're really truly doing is you're introducing lots of different things to the student to find out what they like.
Okay.
In
Wonderful.
a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Am I? Can you? Am I on? Yes, yes I am.
A lot of research to support what you just said, because the research that was done with early childhood kiddos was that they gave the parents and the teachers statistics of checklist and asked them to rate them from 1 to 10. Right. And then they actually did a preference assessment. The kid found out the parents and the teachers were totally off. Yep. The child really had what they thought was a 10, but that child thought was a 1.
Well, and that's really an interesting thing also, because this is how we can expand. We know that a lot of our kids are very routinized and they enjoy the same thing. And so this is another way that we can hopefully expand some of those preferences, because that's really important too. And if they haven't been introduced to new items, if we haven't taught them what this item does, what this toy does, how to interact with something, they may not know. So we're also expanding items this way too, and teaching. It's another way that we can teach skills.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to quickly, can you quickly click?
I can click.
Can't say that 3 times fast. Environmental supports, we're going to go through scripts in just a little bit, but visual schedules, I saw that on several of your sheets that you're already using visual schedules. You're already presenting your instructions visually. Structured work systems, just a show of hands, how many of you are using structured work systems in your classrooms?
So this is schedules. These are routines, very visual, work boxes.
Okay, so maybe next February
we'll do structured teaching.
we can talk about structured work systems. Not a selfish plug, but there's a great article on those in the Teacher and Teaching Exceptional Children in 2009. Kara Hume, Christi Carnahan, and I wrote a very how-to, step-by-step, how to put a structured work system into your classroom. Very teacher-friendly language. It's in TEC, not Exceptional Children from CEC. And
it's a really good to-do article, how to
very
implement.
basic to-do, and how you really have to understand a student's level of abstraction before you can put one effectively in place. So that'll be a whole other day. But structured work systems are incredible. Absolutely incredible. So if you're not ready for those, we'll go there on another day. It's one of my favorite interventions of all time. Scripts we'll talk about in a bit, and I'm guessing you guys know what a power card is. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, clickety click. I see food. You all know this is what speaks to me. Choice making. We've already gone there, right?
We have covered choice making.
We're there. Okay.
And this is our new.
I want to show you the first new one because I don't want everybody leaving me at lunch and not hearing a new one. So cognitive behavioral intervention is now considered an evidence-based practice. It used to be something that we only saw in the clinic. It was really something where we were able to really regulate that in a very structured environment. But really what we want to do is teach kids to self-regulate. Sound familiar? You all have brought this topic up several times today. It's teaching them to examine their own thoughts, teaching them to examine their own emotions, even if they don't have the verbal capacity to tell you that. And so you all have probably seen one of these, a 5-point scale. How many of you are using 5-point scales? 5-point scales are unbelievable.
There's a whole book on them. The Incredible 5-Point Scale.
It's incredible. The Incredible 5-Point Scale. You can change this to match the behavior that you're working on or that you want a student to learn to self-regulate on. If you think about this, almost all kids know how to do this. If they've ever been to the doctor, they've ever been mapped for cochlear implants, they've been asked, is this an elephant sound or a mouse sound, or are you in the middle, right? That they're learning to point at, even if I can't tell you that I'm feeling really frustrated, I can tell you that I'm here versus here. And so it's teaching students, okay, right now you're throwing a chair, you're here, teaching them to identify where is the level of emotion and regulation.
But it pairs it with a visual, and it gives examples of what that behavior looks like at a certain level. And then the really awesome thing about it is in that third column, usually, it tells you what you can do. So it gives you examples of strategies of how you can get from a 5 back down to a 1, especially if it's a self-regulation behavior, or if we're starting to lose a little bit of control and our anxiety is increasing. What can I do to help bring my system back down? And so there's strategies that are built into this system, and it helps with that self-regulation and self-management. So wonderful. So there's the 5-point scale, incredible 5-point scale, but her newest one that she came out with is 5 is Against the Law. So it's a really good book for a lot of our kiddos who may engage in behavior that could get them in trouble. So it talks about stealing, it talks about stalking, it talks about some of those behaviors that are very difficult, navigating that hidden curriculum. It talks about language, and it talks about all of the different behaviors that would result in the law being involved. So it's a really good book as well.
I especially like that book for teenagers. I think most people
5 is Against the Law.
Have been around me know that we had a teacher that taught a student that was 13 nonverbal to go into the restroom to take care of some physical needs.
0 tolerance.
Well, I said, you know, this is the thing. The teacher thought that the taking care of his personal needs was the problem. That's not the problem. That's human. That's biology. The problem is that she taught him to go into a public restroom to do it. That is a perfect example of 5 is Against the Law.
Because he could do
He's
that
gonna
in
go to
another
jail.
environment.
And
that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's kind of that premise, and especially if you're working with teenagers and some of that behavior that maybe you could deal with when they were little, if they engage in it now, you're talking major issues or problems
It
or
looks
safety
different when they're
issues.
older, and it's a 6-foot student and 160 pounds versus when it's a 40-pound little kid.
So, okay, so that's our first new one, and we'll look at more after lunch.
Carrie
and it's
Dunn-Baran is the
potato
author
break.
of that book.
So right before we go to lunch, I want to make a quick announcement. I wanted to introduce everybody to Stacy Simic. She's here from Lurie Children's Hospital. If you haven't met her. And she is the liaison who, probably a lot of you do know her. She's the liaison from the hospital for children who have cochlear implants, and she provides educational support. She is a teacher, right? Yep. And so on March 12th and April 23rd, Lurie Hospital is sponsoring a kind of an open house Lurie Day. March 12th, the focus is on teachers, and April 23rd, the focus is on early intervention. It's from 9 to 3:30. They're going to have 2 researchers, a child life specialist, an oral habilitation presentation, a tour of the hospital, a tour of the OR, and Dr. Nancy Young doing a live feed video cochlear implant surgery. Lunch is provided, reduced rate parking, and I think there's going to be CPTUs as well. Correct. So if you're interested, here is Stacy's email.
Would you like me to write this down?
We can put it up on the...
Would you like me to make it?
Here.
Sure. It's S.J. Simic.